Okay, first I'm just gonna go through how I would do this, get it exported, and then I will go back and then kind of explain why we're doing all of this. This is, let's just call this metal, and this will be a static. There's my prefine. I can also set quick set. Let's see if that worked. Yep. This is a highway sign. Name set. Set default path. Oh, cancel. Use default path. PE static art. Okay. Oh, that's right. I changed the that this directory doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. But assuming that you do set up your directories, this is how it would work. You could just come here, find what you want, etc., etc. Meshes. This one was the supply side. Okay, now to kind of go back over what all of this stuff does. Let's go. This is discount Darren. Actually, I need to do this. Alright, we're ready to start. Let me hide the collision. The first thing is the align all pivots. I wasn't sure in Fallout 4 what controlled the pivot. For example, you'll notice in some of the vanilla assets, if you try to rotate them, they rotate them very oddly, right? It's because they didn't set their pivots correctly before they exported. So there's a few bugs like that you'll notice in the creation kit or the GEC. For this, I think the old Fallout 3 was the BHK rigid body modifier. That would control everything. For this, I don't really know what controls it, so I just have options to set all the pivots to 0 to 0, or to align all pivots to whatever you want. You can select one thing. So for example, see I have this sitting directly on the grid. I can align all the pivots to, say, this one. Now everything is back to the center on top of the grid. So it's very useful. The reset X form, whenever you're messing around and you're doing a large project, you'll notice that a lot of times, especially if you're doing organic work, your pivots can be completely borked, and you want every pivot pretty much to be identical. Now this is just a modifier. Reset X form is just a modifier, and you'll notice it set it right back to the world. Right, so we can collapse this. The reason I'm talking about this in particular is because a lot of people don't like, I need to get rid of that. A lot of people don't like they don't like collapsing their modifier stack. For this, they could sort of do it like Photoshop, right? They'll just keep adding stuff over and over and over again. So they don't like to collapse it. So if you don't like using this, because it collapses your stack, you'll just have to do it manually. But this, if you don't select on anything, will reset everything. And of course it will collapse your stack. The next is you can add BS lighting FX materials to whatever you select. Say if we don't want the collision. We do want the collision, but let's just say we don't for some reason, or we don't want a certain object. Or say this object and this object are going to be the same material. You can select everything else but those. But for us, we'll just deselect everything, and then we'll add BS lighting materials to the selection. And then we can come in here and double left click to bring them all up. You can also left click and drag, for example. You just have to make sure you want to create an instance. So whatever you do to this, it happens to the original one. And what I did was I added the prefix. So if you have a naming conventions that you like to use, you want to name all of your objects, then it will just add this prefix, and you can save your BGSM. just, well, obviously you wouldn't save your collision. You don't want to save a BGSM to a collision, but if you want to save this, we can just Control C, and then it will save it as a BGSM as long as your pathing is correct. And to export BGSM files, you have to at least save it first, or it won't export with the scene. To load, what I do though is I save the BGSM. After I show my textures, and I'll come down here and do whatever I need to do. I'll add a diffuse and normal, maybe even environment or glow, whatever it needs, and then I save it, and then I reload it again, and that way I make sure that it gets it's able to be exported correctly. And I'll go through and do that on each of these. And the naming convention is very helpful because it'll make you keep track of what material you're using. The create proxy and parent, this is kind of hard to explain, but originally in the Habit Content tools, you would come down here and you would say create a rigid body with proxies. That's just about every tutorial on the internet. It shows you how to do that. What that essentially does is that whenever you say we select everything is selected, and you go to the HCT and do what I just said, it will randomly select something, and sometimes you'll get a collision object, and you can't use a collision object because what it does is it takes a geometry object and it links everything to it. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. So it in effect is actually making one of your objects in the scene a proxy for a reason I don't really understand. But so we did some testing and we found out that you can use a helper object in place of the proxy parent. So that's what I would recommend doing instead of you. Sometimes this can get kind of messed up. I don't know, it's kind of confusing, but when you have multiple collision objects and 20, 30 different unique objects, in your scene for this, you might as well just use this instead of playing games. I mean, if you want to, you can just come down here and you can choose whatever object you want, or you can set a random object and it will not pick a collision object. For the common pivot, we would have had to select align all pivots to current selection, so it will save where you wanted the pivot to be created, or where you wanted the proxy to be created. We're just going to use origin 000 because that's where everything's at anyways. But if you had some unique something or another, you would come and you would use common pivot, or you could just set a custom. You could set custom coordinates, for example, for where you want the proxy to be. And I'm not sure, but I haven't tested this, but it might be that if the proxy is off, is actually out of line with your other pivots, that might affect how it is able to be rotated in the GEC. So you got to be careful in that. So for us, we will just apply these settings, and you'll notice it created the proxy right here. To show you what this does, we'll open up the schematic view, and you see this is the proxy is the parent. Okay, and now these are all of the children. So everything else in the scene, including the collision, is attached to this. So if we select the proxy, for example, everything else moves around with it. This is how we would do like Fallout 3 animations. Instead of dealing with skeletons or whatever, you could just use a parent object, and whenever you exported it, it would treat it as basically a bone that you could move around. So like sliding doors, opening chests, that kind of thing. Now we come to add havoc shapes to collision objects, and if you didn't notice, these are supposed to kind of go in order of when you would use this. You can set up a naming convention for collision. I usually just use _C, so that's a naming convention that I use. that I set, and it will save it to your INI file. For the most part, box, sphere, capsule, and cylinder are mainly used, from what I understand, for animatable objects, particularly like people and creatures and things like that. Most of the time you'll use convex hull and mesh, and one of the developers said do not use mesh. But I think he really was referring to a lot of people will just create a clone of whatever object, so it'll be very high poly. I create my own very low poly meshes, so in this way there's not a convex hull, and if you want to, you'll have to mess around with it yourself if you really want to know what the difference is between a convex hull and a mesh. But this is by far better if you make your own low poly collision objects yourself. And we'll just add the shape to the selection, and as you can see, it adds it. This is like basically saying, okay, this is your collision object. So when you export it, it pretty much says this is your collision object. Now there's one more complicated bit where you would normally come in here and go to collision group and then add everything, but that's quite annoying, to be honest with you. But we can have a predefine. We can set up 7 predefines, and it will save to the INI. So if you use a lot of the same stuff, for this metal or metal heavy clutter, or this is a static, and we'll save that as a predefined, and then we can set it right here. And for this is predefined 1, we can just hit 1 and it will automatically set it. Or you can change the quick set predefine, for example. It changes it right here, and you can just hit quick set, and then this will show you what everything is defined as. An export scene, this is a way, this is really the only thing you need to do is just type in a name without the extension. So my NIF or whatever, and then you can tab or enter to save. And you can set a default path that will save to the INI, and then you can use the default path every time you come in here. So really all you're doing is you're just writing your name of your NIF down, and then you can hit use default path, continue to the export options, and then boom. That makes it very much faster than going through all this crap. And then of course you can always run LRIC from this, and once you have all your pathing set up, exporting takes a lot less time. And to sum up here, the reason why we're doing all this, instead of clicking on one thing and hoping for the best, you now can figure out what you need to do if you make a mistake. You say the collision's not working right because it's a convex hull. It's gonna make a convex hull out of all of this, and it's not gonna work right. You can just come back in and change it to mesh, and then go through the process again. Make sure your collision groups are still set, and then run it back. So that's basically the intent of the script, is so you know how to do it, and this should make it much faster once you kind of get the hang of it. I think that's just about everything I wanted to show.